Greetings everyone. Today I'm going to be talking about biosystems engineering. I'm going to get everyone a little bit familiar with what we do here in our curriculum to see if this is the major for you. All the photos here for the most part are of our BE students and faculty, and I hope you enjoy. So what do biosystems engineers do? What we try and do is apply engineering design and analysis to biological systems all the way from microbial life to ecosystems as a whole, such as lakes and forests. We also focus a lot on natural resources such as soil and water. What we try and do is incorporate biological principles into our designs to preserve ecological balance. We want our designs to work two ways, both for humans and the environment, and not just one way for humans only. We like to say here is if we do our job well, you may never even notice our work. Why do we need biosystems engineer? So what we really want to do going forward as a society is to reduce our fossil fuel usage. So while fossil fuels are very useful, they generate a lot of negative side effects such as global warming, and when they spill and leak, they negatively impact the environment. So what we want to do is create alternatives that generate sustainable energy. We also want to manufacture products using non-toxic compounds, so when we use them, if they get out in the environment, they don't negatively affect the environment, or they're easily recyclable and things like that. We want to develop communities using low impact designs, restore damaged ecosystems such as stream restoration and wetland restoration. And going back to the developing communities with low impact designs, we want to manage stormwater and prevent flooding. We just want to make our world a more sustainable place. Okay, so what do we mean by sustainability? Here we go by the three E's, and we want all three of them present in our designs: ecologically sound, socially equitable, and economically feasible. A big one these days is economical feasibility. If you design something and it's just not economically feasible, no one's going to invest in it, and it's just not going to work. So what are some examples of things that aren't sustainable? Pictured here is a bird stuck in oil after an oil spill. And it's just not sustainable to be using these fossil fuels when if we mess up and they leak into the environment, they just disturb it such a large amount. A very important thing to note is during oil spills, it's not just the wildlife affected, it's everyone whose livelihood is centered around that location. So anyone on the coast who makes their livelihood from the coast, they're out of a job for perhaps years. Here's another example of something that's not sustainable. When we throw plastics away and they're not recycled, a lot of times they might end up in these convergence zones in the ocean, as we can see on the left. These plastics, they don't degrade on any appreciable scale, and they just accumulate in the ocean, which is very negative for any wildlife out here. As I was saying earlier, fossil fuels impact climate change negatively. The temperature of the Earth is rising, and most of the old ice in the Arctic and Antarctic have melted by now. So this picture just demonstrates some of the effects that might have on the environment. This female polar bear has had to swim 9 days to find new ice. She loses 1/5 of her body weight, and her cub ends up drowning. So if you're watching this at home, I'll put this link in the description at the bottom of the video, and you can follow it to watch it. And it just demonstrates what I was just talking about with the old ice melting and being replaced only with new thin ice. Okay, so what can we do? This all sounds rather doom and gloom, but here at Clemson in the Biosystems department, we really do believe that we can positively impact the environment with our designs. And what we're talking about is developing sustainable solutions, and we want to prevent, avoid, or minimize the problem to begin with. We don't always want to be cleaning up after the mess, and this is equatable to treating not the symptoms of a disease, but treating what causes the disease. Here are just some examples of sustainable solutions that we work with mostly. We work a lot with low impact development, which is decreasing stormwater runoff, which in turn reduces flooding. We work a lot with biofuels here at Clemson. As I've been talking about a lot, we don't want to rely on petroleum products and fossil fuels anymore. We want to develop sustainable energy that can replace these petroleum products, and we want them to be as carbon neutral as possible. Another sustainable solution that's being looked at a lot these days is biomaterials. As I was just saying again, is we don't want to rely on petroleum and the products produced through the petroleum process, such as a lot of plastics. We don't want our biomaterials to release toxic byproducts into foods like BPA and plastics used to do before it was banned. And these toxins, they would leach into your food and your water, and they could be taken into the body and negatively impact our bodies. We don't want this anymore. And we want these biomaterials to biodegrade, and when they biodegrade, we don't want them to negatively impact the environment in any way, shape, or form. The last thing we do is green infrastructure, such as vegetated roofs and bioswales. What these do is what I was just talking about with the reducing the volume, and they treat the stormwater runoff, but they also have several applications in passive heating and cooling, which we'll talk about later. Okay, here's a couple of examples of sustainable biomaterials. In the top left here, we have a regular plastic fork on the left and a PLA fork on the right. PLA being polylactic acid or a polymer of lactic acid. And as you can see, they have the same form and they serve the same function. The only difference is the PLA fork, if properly composted, can decompose on a scale of 1 to 2 years rather than 400 to 500 of a regular plastic fork. On the top right here, we have another example of a regular plastic water bottle on the left and a PLA water bottle on the right. And again, these decompose on a scale much shorter than the regular plastics. However, when they do biodegrade, the polymer of polylactic acid breaks into lactic acid and will have no negative impact on the environment. Really, the only downside of the PLA plastics is they aren't very resistant to heat and will shrink if you put them in the washer or leave them out in your car like I have done. And the bottom left here is a real simple one, and I think it's a very important one. On the left, we have styrofoam packing peanuts, and styrofoam, it doesn't degrade very well, and when it does, it's disastrous for the environment. On the right, it's a much better alternative. It's just starch peanuts made from corn and other starches. And these starch peanuts, if you just put them in a glass of water, they'll dissolve. And in fact, if you eat them, they'll have no negative impact on you. And what we're doing is we just want to look for solutions like this, where it doesn't negatively impact us or our environment. So here's an interesting case study that highlights the point that sometimes the solution doesn't have to be sustainable so much as just a better solution. So before the 1980s, McDonald's used the clamshell containers on the left, which are polystyrene and are similar to styrofoam with their negative impacts on the environment. And they hired an outside consultant to come in and reduce their waste and make their packaging better and things like that. And what they came up with was it's not a sustainable solution. But on the right, we can see these paper containers. And basically, these are much better for the environment. And in the end of the case study, McDonald's actually reduced their waste by 30% and they were saving money. So this is, like I said, it's a great case study to highlight the point that sometimes we're just looking for a better solution. So here at Clemson Biosystems Engineering, we have a couple facilities. We're mostly taught out of Brackett Hall, where all of our classes and labs are taught by either faculty or grad students, and it's really quite nice. And then each cohort of students is basically 30 each year, or for a total of 90 undergrad students in all, sophomore to senior. And it's really nice. You get to know every professor personally if you want, and you really do get to know all your students in your cohort too. But here's just a brief look at the BE curriculum. Our undergrad curriculum is ABET accredited, so when you do take and pass the FE, you can get accreditation as an engineer in training. And if you're taking an engineering science, you're going to probably want that. In fact, all the engineering majors at Clemson are ABET accredited, so if you come here at Clemson, you don't have to worry about that at all. The BE curriculum includes all the basic engineering sciences from statics, dynamics, electrical circuits. You're not going to be found wanting in any way at all. But we also take a lot of core life sciences such as biology and chemistries, which help us in our biological design focus. And then we also have our own BE core courses from geomatics, watershed hydrology to biological kinetics, or how bacteria grow. Greater than 9% of our students who take the FE pass it on the first time, as opposed to 80% average across the United States. And in fact, in our very recent semesters, we've reached nearly 100% pass rate. On this slide, we have a couple examples of BE courses that you might take. For the most part, all of our courses come attached with a lab, and a lot of these labs are outside rather than inside with lab coats and goggles. On our top left here, we have our geomatics lab, which is all outside. You go out there and you conduct land surveys with various equipment, and you get familiar with the various equipment. In the middle here, we have installing a sediment MFC, which is a small bioreactor that the students design and end up implementing outside. And in the right is it is an actual lab work where you test theory with testing a plug flow reactor, but even testing theory in this major can be quite enjoyable. The labs for the most part emphasize hands-on learning skills, lab skills, field measurement skills, and fabrication skills. Rarely do you go in a lab and just do math. This slide is focused on our sophomore design project. All sophomores do this one. It's a microbial fuel cell based project, and you start from the very beginning of engineering design and proceed to the very end. It begins with a literature review. This subject is relatively unknown at this time, so students, they go in, they do a literature review, and with their literature review, they design their own MFC, and then they fabricate it in the lab. And then the next step is we implement it outside or operate and test it. And this goes on for the course of a week or two. And then with that data, we go into the lab again and we analyze the performance. This is a great example of the labs we do here at Biosystems. There's lab work inside and outside. So just as the sophomores do an MFC design project, the juniors usually do a heat transfer design project. And these designs vary from heat exchanger for bioreactors, hydro coolers, water stills, vegetative roof, and solar air heater. A lot of these designs are aimed at passively heating or cooling buildings to reduce electricity costs. This example on the bottom right, the solar air heater, it passively heats a building without using any electricity. And then the vegetative roofs, not only do they reduce flooding and reduce stormwater, but they cool the building. As with all engineering disciplines, Biosystems engineers have to do a senior design project their senior year. The seniors get in groups and they choose a topic of interest, and these can be incredibly varied, from a biohydrogen pilot plant, which you can see in the top left here, the sustainable shed 2.0 in the top right, and the oyster reef restoration design in the bottom right, and various other ones you can see here. Really, it's just about anything that you see a problem with in the community, and you can look into designing a project around that. So at Biosystems Engineering, we have two emphasis areas. We have ecological engineering and bioprocessing. They just work with a different magnitude but for the same goals. Ecological engineering has a lot of outdoor field work. It's based mainly in ecology, and it's focused on ecosystems as a whole, managing stormwater using low impact development techniques, stream restoration, wetland restoration. It's just ecosystems as a whole. Bioprocessing is similar in that it has a lot of outdoor field work but indoor lab work as well. It's based mainly in microbiology, so instead of ecosystems as a whole, they focus a lot more on microbials, and they produce a lot of things from this. Biomaterials, biofuels, chemicals, fermented foods, and beverages. In fact, the possibilities are nearly limitless. Here's an example of an ecological engineering project. I was just talking about the senior design for the oyster reef restoration, and we actually have taken it a couple steps further here at Clemson by creating a creative inquiry class, which is a 1-hour credit course any student can take, and a lot of students have contributed to this design over the years. So worldwide, 80% of the natural oyster reefs have been depleted, but the oyster reefs provide ecological benefit, such as filtering excess nutrients, anchoring coastline, and just these benefits have justified us looking into a way to restore them. So the constructed reefs that we've been looking at, they accelerate the establishment of oysters because oyster spat, or the juvenile form, require hard substrate to land on to grow. As you can see in the top right here, this is a sample of an oyster reef. And if there are no oyster reefs there, the spat land in the sand and they can't grow and they'll just end up dying. So our design was using recycled crab trap provide substrate for the spat to land on. It's rather simple and heuristic, but as you can see in the bottom, oyster growth on the rings after 2 years is pretty normal. It looks very natural. So our designs include not only the structural considerations, but the biological ones too. Here's another example of ecological engineering. It's the bioretention pond design. I've talked a lot about stormwater management, and this is an excellent, simple, and elegant solution to these problems, and you might see them at your local Walmart. Well, basically, these are just retention ponds, so when it rains, it reduces stormwater runoff to the normal drainage systems. The water will just accumulate here, and it won't go into the drainage system unless there's too much water. And another important aspect of these designs is the soil and the plants and the trees. Basically, we choose these very carefully to filter out excess nutrients and toxic materials so that it takes them out of the water before they ever get to a larger drainage system. So bioprocess engineering is just a different side to the same coin as ecological, and this side of the coin just happens to work with microbials. And as you can see on the left, nutrients and the microbes will go in the bioreactor, and we'll get all kinds of stuff out on the right, such as biofuels, fermented foods, biomaterials, biopharmaceuticals, nutraceuticals, all kinds of things we as a society need. Here's an example of bioprocess engineering. On the right, we have sunflower seeds, and we've pressed oil from them. And using this oil, we can produce biodiesel, which is in the bottom middle. And this biodiesel is very similar in form to diesel. In fact, it's identical in form. If you put this in a diesel engine, the engine won't know a difference, and in fact, it might be a little bit healthier for the engine. In the top middle, we have a byproduct of the process called glycerol, and we've been exploring methods of using that too. In the top right, we have something that's similar in form to styrofoam, but it's completely biodegradable, and we believe it works great as insulation. In the right bottom, it's just soap. It's just very simple soap made from glycerol, and while it doesn't look like much, it smells fantastic, and it works just like normal soap. Here's another example of bioprocess engineering that one of our senior design groups have done recently, and they cultivated and grew a filamentous strain of algae called Otagonia, and they tried to produce paper with it. The industrial paper process uses a lot of chemicals, and they output a lot of heat to our local waterways that really mess with the environment. So this senior design group decided to create a process that had way less of the negative effects and was very sustainable. And they got fairly far in the single semester they've been working on it. In the top right, we have the first production attempt, and it's rather dark as you can tell, but they kept going with it, and the bottom right is the final paper they produced at the end of the semester. It's a lot lighter, and the consistency is very similar to cardboard paper, and as you can see, you can write on it. We actually have a returning grad student who worked on this project, and we're hoping he continues it as far as he can. Lastly, we have a couple more examples of bioprocess engineering. On the left, we have a very expensive shellfish feed, and it's just a large mass of various strains of algae. On the right, we have a nutraceutical known as DHA, colloquially known as fish oils. As it turns out, it's from algae and not the fish, and a lot of nutraceutical companies just cut out the middleman of fish. They cultivate the algae and they produce the fish oils. Okay, so at Clemson we have several research facilities for biosystems engineering, and right here pictured is the mobile biodiesel unit, and it can just take students on a tour through the start of biodiesel production to the end. All biosystems engineering students end up touring this facility, but non-students can also. Another research facility we have available to us is the Clemson Aquaculture Center. It's a field-scale system for algae production, fish production, and our microbial fuel cell implementation. We don't do so much fish production with it for now, but it's a great place for algae production. So just as the projects are very different and varied for biosystems engineering, the opportunities with a Bachelor's of Science degree are also varied. So one very important thing in the workforce these days is going into an entry-level job with some sort of experience, and this experience is gained through co-oping or interning during your undergrad, and 80% of our students co-op or intern. In fact, most do it every summer from sophomore, junior to senior year, and there's actually a lot of opportunities to start interning and co-oping from your freshman year. 70% of our grads enter their workforce with their Bachelor's of Science degree. Ecological engineering, bioprocessing engineering, and various other positions. The range of starting salaries is from 45 to 70,000, and this is very competitive with any other engineering undergrad programs. Our other 30% go to grad schools at top-ranked schools, or it's actually an excellent field if you're thinking medical or dental. So there's a ton of job opportunities with your Bachelor's of Science degree. For ecological, there's a lot of firms actually locally in South Carolina, so if you don't want to move out, if you're from here, this is a great option for you. If you're bioprocess engineering, on the other hand, you might have to move across the country, but that is rather exciting to do as you're young. And as you can see, there's just a whole list. I'm not going to list them all, and you might want to explore this on your own. And lastly, what we recommend if you do choose our program, if you like what our curriculum has to offer, like what I've been saying, we want you to get involved. We have a Biosystems Engineering Student Club, which has a student branch of the ASABE. This is a great place for professional, social, and networking activities. A large part of your undergrad is networking. It's a lot easier to find a job the more people you know. This is a great place to do it. We also have the Order of the Engineer as an option. We have a student chapter here at Clemson that was initiated recently by a BE senior, and we're rather proud of that. And also at Clemson, Tau Beta Pi is an engineering fraternity with a lot of service opportunities, and also another great place to network, and also maybe get a couple of scholarships. And lastly, if you want to be a part of a generation that will change the world and you're interested in what I've been talking about, we would really like for you to join us here at Clemson in the Biosystems Engineering Department. If you have any questions, we would love for you to contact us. Here we have our ambassadors and their emails, and we also have the email for the undergraduate coordinator for our program, Dr. Kay Drapshow. If you want any information, if you have any questions, contact us at any time and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. That concludes the presentation and the talk I'm going to be giving today. Thank you for listening, and if you're interested, I hope you look into our program a little bit more.